Hello and welcome to the Last Nighters. We're going to talk about Groundhog Day on this Groundhog Day 2018. And this will come out a few days after, but happy Groundhog Day. This is Daniel and Robert, the Last Nighters, and this will be episode 5. You can find the show notes for this at lastnighters.com/5. So let's kick this thing off. Let's say hello to Robert, and then we'll kick it off with the Google description, as we are wont to do.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Should be a good episode.
All right. So let's get into this. Groundhog Day came out 25 years ago, 1993 drama fantasy, hour and 42 minutes. 8 out of 10 on IMDb, 72% Metacritic, and 96% on the Rotten Tomatoes, with 87% of Google users liking it, recommending it, and giving it the old thumbs up there. The description reads as thus: Phil Connors, I think, is that it? Or Phil, yeah, Connors, is that it?
Yep.
Yeah, Phil Connors, played by Bill Murray, a weatherman, is out to cover the annual emergence of the groundhog from its hole. Phrasing. He gets caught in a blizzard that he didn't predict and finds himself trapped in a time warp. Doing the time warp. He is doomed to relive the same day over and over again until he gets it right. Came out February 12, 1993, directed by Harold Ramis, featuring the Sonny and Cher song, I Got You, Babe. And that is the Google description. What is your initial take on that, Robert?
Yeah, it's very short and generic. One interesting thing about this movie that I thought of seeing it the second time around was that there was no explanation for why he was stuck in this time warp. Other than, obviously, you know, as he turns into, like, going from a jerk to a nice person, there was no kind of magical, you know, interlude. There was no, like, little fairy like you get in Scrooge. Because the Scrooge plot in this movie are basically the same thing. It's jerk becomes nice person, learns how to be a nice guy, gets the girl in the end. But in Scrooge, there's actually a supernatural element to explain what's actually going on and why he's able to see these things and what. But in Groundhog Day, there's none of that. It's just he's stuck in this cycle of hell. And it leads to some interesting scenes where he's kind of pondering, what is going on here? Am I a god? Am I stuck, trapped in some sort of cycle of hell? Am I, you know, am I being punished for something? It's an interesting narrative choice that Ramis did, or the author, the writer and the director, to leave it completely unexplained as to why this is happening, or at least how it's happening, to put it that way.
Yeah, and it basically is a remake of Scrooge, like you were saying, and it does lack that supernatural, you know, being that has come and set this in motion. And in a similar fashion, Bill Murray gets to, like, play through all of these different stages of grief, if you will. You know, these different personalities and different reactions to it. You know, he goes through these different moods. Because initially, you know, he's like, what the hell's going on? And then he's like, oh, well, I can do this to pick up on women and learn everything I ever wanted to learn and, you know, go around saving people. And then after a while, he's like, crap, you know, I hate this. I want to die. And he tried to commit suicide several times. There's one scene where he's in the cafe and he's like, I've been stabbed, shocked, frozen, jumped off a bridge, jumped off a car, hit by a truck. You know, he lists all the ways he's died. And he always reemerges the next morning at 6 a.m. with the alarm clock playing, I Got You, Babe.
Indeed. And, yeah, he goes through all the different, you know, he tries to make the best of it. Because at first he's in denial. He doesn't know what's going on. He thinks people are just, you know, maybe yesterday didn't really happen. Who knows? Or whatever. And then he finally settles into the reality of a situation, and he realizes that his actions have no consequences, or essentially they'll be wiped away the next day. And he starts doing all kinds of terrible things, but in, you know, fairly Bill Murray-ish way. I mean, he doesn't just start murdering people and whatever, but he is an absolute jerk to everybody. And like Daniel said, he gets information on, the good-looking girls, and then he uses that to his advantage the next day. All kinds of like sneaky little underhanded things that you could use to turn the situation to your advantage. Like at one point he robs an armored car, and these would be horrifically immoral things for anybody to do, but there's no consequences. It gets wiped away the next day. So, Daniel, did you have any kind of issue with his character robbing people, almost killing them, all these, committing fraud, tricking people with this gained knowledge? He acts quite immorally, but none of his actions have any kind of permanent repercussions. So, at the end of the day, what harm is there?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And when I saw that part, and it was, I think, the third day of the repetitive day thing, where he goes to the bar with those guys and they get really drunk, and then they try to drive, and then he ends up driving them, and he smashes over a mailbox, one of those blue mailbox USPS things, and I thought that was kind of funny. And then the cops start chasing him, and he's like doing the "you boys like Mexico" type stuff with them, like from Super Troopers, where he's going on and on about what would you do if you had no consequences? We could do anything we want. So he starts driving around crazy, saying stuff like, clean your room, stand up straight, take it like a man. And he's basically evoking Jordan Peterson in his new book, the 12 Rules for Creating Chaos, or Creating Order Out of Chaos, or something like that. Did you get that when you were watching it, like the Jordan Peterson stuff there?
I didn't get any Jordan Peterson link, no, but I'm glad you picked up on it. Yeah, I think it's his new book is the 12 Rules for Living or something like that. It's he's doing all the promotion right now for it. Supposedly it's being well reviewed.
Yeah, I've started reading it, and I've put a little blurb up on the site about it. But when Bill Murray was basically going, consequence-free, you don't have to do this stuff, to clean your room, and Jordan Peterson's famous for saying that, sort yourself out, that kind of thing. And then he starts driving on the railroad tracks, and I wanted to bring that up because you and I have a shared story regarding an incident like that back when we were youngins, and I want to pass it off to you, and maybe we can retell that in a short minute or two here.
Well, Daniel's talking about this incident where my cousin lived near the tracks, just across the tracks. There's a set of railroad tracks that kind of divide this small town between east and west. And one night, I guess, we were in high school or thereabouts, and we had this video camera. And for some reason, we were out filming, making little movies or whatever. We were talking, and we come across this car stalled on the tracks that she must have turned and then driven onto the tracks and then couldn't drive back off of them. And we had spent, right as we found this car, we were like bad-mouthing the cops in town, as you do. I mean, who doesn't? I do right now, 10 times worse than I ever did before. But we didn't know that this evidence would be called, to be appropriated by the cops for any potential case that was going to be put against this lady who had stranded herself on the tracks. So we find this lady on the tracks. We go and we call because, you have to call it in. You don't want this train to come along and smash this car. And, of course, then along comes a cop. And we're sitting there at the tracks with this lady who is obviously inebriated and the cop, and we're filming the whole thing, sort of. So a couple days later, or maybe it's the next day, who knows, we get a phone call saying, hey, we need that tape for evidence for this case. And so we try and rustle up like an extra VCR, because this is back in the days of VHS tapes, and we're trying to edit out us talking crap about cops, and we just want to get this little, part that they would need for the evidence, and we ended up, just having a cut little part. I don't know how long it was, maybe 10, 15 minutes, but then we gave it to the cop, and all the cop did was complain that we didn't show her face enough or something like that, like it wasn't good enough evidence for him. Anyway, I'm glad it wasn't good evidence at this point, but, I mean, I'm glad the train didn't come along and smash her, but I didn't want anything bad to happen to her. I mean, she was obviously inebriated. She made a bad choice. I don't know how you make that turn to go onto those tracks. If she was trying to kill herself, maybe, I don't know. But do you remember much more about that?
Yeah, I remember we tried. Yeah, I think we tried talking to her, and she was saying really weird, random stuff like, "So all the kids can buy some fruit." I remember that line for some reason.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, that's what that's from.
Yeah. And, that probably happened around the same time that this movie had come out. So perhaps this is a instance of real life imitating art. Maybe she saw it. Maybe she saw Groundhog Day and was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to drive on the tracks, and I'm not going to live by their rules anymore, And you make the choices and you live with them, which is what Bill Murray says. And then when the cop catches up to him, bringing this back to the movie, he tries to order food from the cops because he's going to wake up the next morning listening to Sonny and Cher, so he doesn't care. And so he's like, oh, yeah, I'll have a double burger and some fries and like a milkshake. And then the really drunk guy is like, is it too early for flapjacks?
Yeah, the humor in this movie really holds up. Of course, the humor in most Bill Murray movies, I would say, still holds up. He just has a certain kind of sardonic take and dry wit sort of thing that doesn't age, that ages really, really well.
Yeah. So let's start introducing our categories. So one of them is number of tears jerked, and for me, there's a certain amount of emotion that we've alluded to previously, that Bill Murray is able to go through the whole gamut, the whole Kubler-Ross, stages of grief thing, and display all these different personalities. And he's a great jerk. He starts out the movie very full of himself, very sarcastic and mean to people. He pulls the celebrity card early and often. The prima donna is what Chris Elliott calls him all the time. And he's just great at that. But then he can sort of get away with it just because, like you were saying, he has that ability to pull off this sarcastic snark but still be humorous about it. And it's a very amazing attribute for someone to have because, I've had my share of being sarcastic, and it usually doesn't come off very well. Just ask my wife. Yes.
Bill Murray can get away with it, or at least he does in the movies. I think, the most normal human beings can't get away with it nearly as well as he can.
Yeah, so that was my long-winded way of saying, he does make this character arc. He goes through this entire, he does learn how to be a better person. And it's, to get the girl in the end. So for me, I did get some heartstrings pulled, and the humor really did hold up. Like, in the open, we said this is a 25-year-old movie. I think it plays pretty well today still.
Oh, so definitely, and that's indicative of the scores. I mean, Rotten Tomatoes didn't exist back when this movie came out, nor did the Googles or any of that other stuff. So this is people watching it or reviewing it way after the fact. Yeah, totally holds up. As far as the number of tears jerked for me, I didn't really start getting teary-eyed and choked up until he decides to use his powers for good. When he becomes a superhero and he saves the kid falling out of the tree, even though it's a thankless thing, he saves the kid and the kid just runs off. And he's like, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, kid, or whatever. he has made the churn and, has decided that he's going to maybe be a force for good in the world. He saves the kid. He saves the guy choking. The love story, even though that was the center of the movie, didn't really work as well for me. He goes quickly, really quickly, almost as if there's some missing scenes from being this, sarcastic, I don't care about this town or anything that's happening jerk, to I'm in love with this lady, and I got to be with her, and I got to figure everything out about her in order to woo her. For me, that I never got the scene where she did a thing, and he looked at her and saw her in a new light, and he made the decision that maybe this is the girl for him. I never got that scene. So for me, the whole romance didn't quite work out. I still appreciated it, and I did like the way he ended up wooing her, and I liked the idea that there was that one perfect day, and that still wasn't right, and he had to do it again. I appreciated that. That was really good. But for me, it was more about the turn of him turning into a superhero than it was the romance for the tears jerked. And I would say this was about this is like a 4 on the level of tears jerked. There are some good tears, but this wasn't nearly. It's more of a comedy. I mean, what do you want? It's not so much of a tear jerker type thing.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what got me was when the old man dies in the hospital.
Yes.
And he's determined to prevent that. And he tries and he tries and he tries. And, it's a little montage, and he just can't do it. And that's the part that really got me. So that's going to bump it up for me, maybe to a 6 or a 7. We'll settle on a 6.5 for Tears Jerked for me, based on the old man. And I don't think he ever figured out the old man.
No, he didn't. The old man dies. Yeah, and the nurse is just like, sometimes people just die. Can't do anything to stop it. Yeah, that was an emotional thing for me too. Maybe I'll put it up to like a 5.
All right, revised scores. So our next category, we're still sort of developing these as we go along, but one of them I have in mind is like the internal consistency. So the logic as they lay it out in the film, how well do they stick to it? Because there are some, time-bending elements here. And as you had said earlier, they don't really explain why or how these things are happening. So maybe this isn't the best category to really go through. So I don't know. Do you have something else in mind to discuss, or is that enough of a jumping-off point? Does it spark anything for you?
Well, I could nitpick, but it would just be on the basis of nitpicking. You would have to assume that he spends the exact same amount of time every morning going to the exact same places in order for the insurance salesman to see him at the exact same time every time. And that just seems improbable. But I really appreciated what they did with it. That was really fun. I thought probably the funniest line of the movie was when Bill... it's still cracking me up right now when he's accosted by him yet another time, and the best way to get rid of this guy is to like embrace him and ask him if he can call in sick, turning the tables, be like, oh, now you're uncomfortable. Oh, so good, excellent tactic. Shift the level of comfort to the other person.
Right. Now, was that intended to, like, give him the, hey, I'm interested in you vibe to, like, scare him off?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I thought maybe SJWs would say it's homophobic or something, but I thought it was really funny. It wasn't necessarily homophobic, I didn't think. It was more, here's this person I just met after, how many years, and all of a sudden he's grabbing me. Clearly, there's something wrong with his brain. I don't want to hang out with this guy.
Right. There were a lot of callbacks in this movie. So when Ned Ryerson first bumps into him on the first day, he's like, "Do you remember me? It's Ned. Ned Ryerson. Bing." he ends up using that when he's picking up women initially, like on day 3 or 4, where he's like realizing he can get away with whatever he wants. So then he starts getting information from like one of the girls in the restaurant, and then the next day he purposefully bumps into her and implants memories, a la Ghost in the Shell style, where he's like, "Hey, we sat in history class next to each other. I asked you out to the prom, and but I was a lot shorter then." And he was just convincing enough to have her actually believe that maybe that was possible. And then, of course, he used that to his advantage. And I thought that was kind of very underhanded, obviously. But this was early on in the process, and I guess it's like actually over 8 years of repeated days here, where he was still kind of exercising his power. This is kind of before he's a god and he's tried to kill himself a bunch of ways and he knows everything by now. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting because then he later on, robs the armored car, and then he uses the money to buy like this sports car and dress like Clint Eastwood and bring this other girl to the movies and tell her to call him Bronco, And did you catch the little the joke in that when he's ordering the ticket for the movie?
I didn't catch the joke. I don't remember, but I did remember that was the one out-of-place scene that didn't fit with any of the other scenes. I mean, I understand that he's like living it up, and he's spending this money on a prostitute or in a car and an outfit or whatever, but nowhere else is it mentioned, "Oh, I've always liked cowboys and Clint Eastwood and dressing up as whatever and whatever." That just seemed like out of left field, a bizarre thing that was thrown in for no reason. But what was the joke?
So when he orders the ticket, he goes up to the window and he says, "1 adult and, well, 2 adults, I guess."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, man. So what category do you think that we should do next? Like how well the movie was made? Because, yeah, let's do that. The craft of the movie. Let's go into that. My take on it is it was very well done. Like, things were pretty precise. The comedy's there. The script is there. I'm pretty sure that, per Bill Murray movies, he had plenty of leash with which to work. And I read somewhere that, when he has the Groundhog driving the truck, the Groundhog actually bit him twice. and he continued to make the scene.
The guy's a professional. Well, we're dealing with Harold Ramis, who I believe directed Ghostbusters, right? With Aykroyd writing, and then most of it was just improv. So, yeah, I can imagine another team-up of those two guys again, just letting Bill be Bill. I don't know how much was improv versus how much was written, but I imagine a large amount of his improv made it to the screen. Other than what I've already said, as far as inconsistencies and little scenes that didn't do much for me, I would agree that this is a fairly well-made movie. So, good job, Mr. Ramis. Rest in peace. I'd give it an 8 as far as, craft. I mean, this isn't a movie that relies on any kind of special effects or anything. There's some fakey-looking fake snow, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. When you got to fake the snow, you do what you can.
Yep. So.
Yeah, I think it was well done. I'll give it a 7 there. Nothing super amazing as far as the craft, but competently well done and still holds up to this day. Like, there are some movies that you watch that are 25 years old, and you're like, wow, doesn't look like very good at all. I'm reminded of Night of the Living Dead, the remake. That was like 1990 maybe, and it did not age well. But this one aged pretty well, and I think a lot of it maybe has to do with the production design. It's supposed to look like a small town, and the people are wearing pretty conservative style clothing, like, shirts and ties, and jackets and hats and things like that. So it could be almost any time period, any decade, really.
Yeah, the only thing that really gives it away is, I guess, the cars, the typical 80s cars. Maybe early 90s cars, but mostly 80s cars.
Yeah. Well, let's do a catch-all, because I've got a series of notes. But why don't we start with your notes? I know you had 3, and then we can jump into mine.
Well, we've already done mine. Just the fraud that the character does. There's one scene that's kind of date rapey, where he brings her back to his house, and he's using, I mean, if that had happened today, he'd be part of the Me Too movement, where she would write some kind of a tell-all, and how he kept asking her to stay, and how she kept saying no, she wanted to leave, or that she'd better leave. Reminded me kind of the Aziz Ansari thing.
Yep, I have that note as well. But
okay.
My note says, at least she verbalizes a no in this one.
Yes. Yeah, she actually says no, but he doesn't take no for an answer multiple times. But he doesn't exactly force himself on her. I mean, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly probably more aggressiveness, and I don't mean like violent aggression, but I mean like he's trying beyond what's probably acceptable today.
Right.
Well, I mean, clearly, yeah. I mean, you don't even have to say no now, and it's supposed to be like intimated somehow.
Yeah, you're supposed to be a mind reader. You're supposed to just understand what exactly, even if she's giving off positive vibes and positive nonverbal communication, you're supposed to mind read whether or not she wants to or not.
Right, which reminds me of Dave Chappelle's very prescient skit on the love contract. Like, that's relevant today, and that's over 10 years ago.
Yeah. Indeed. All right, what else you got?
Well, I wanted to talk about Bill Murray. You know, he goes through this arc, and he finally is resigned to the fact that he's there. So then he starts learning, right? Not just about everything that happens in the town and about everyone and using it to his advantage, but to actually improve himself. You know, he learns how to play the piano. He learns how to speak Italian and how to speak French and learns the poetry because, and this is one of my favorite lines when he's talking with the Andie MacDowell character, he's like, you know, trying to get some background on her, and she says that she was a art history major or something and studied 19th century French poetry, and he says, that's a waste of time.
Well, he's not wrong.
But later on, you know, he of course learns it and then recites it to her. And this is when he's doing the, you know, trying to do whatever he can to, you know, I guess he's realized that he really likes her and wants to be with her. So then he's doing whatever he can to anticipate or learn everything so that he can say and do all the perfect and right things for her. And she sniffs it out after a while. You know?
Right. During the date rapey scene, she's like, oh my God, you planned all this, didn't you? And of course he says no, but of course he did. In fact, he had spent probably years planning it out. And then it isn't until he realizes that no, he just has to improve himself and good things will come. I guess that's never said, but that's what he does. He just kind of, there's the final big day that we get in the movie where she finally decides to, you know, he's the guy. And I still think that's too fast. It's still the first day for her, but she sees that he's this amazing guy and that he knows everybody in town and everybody in town loves him. And all of a sudden she's on board with him, almost as if she has been privy to all the things that has happened in the movie, but of course she hasn't. But if you suspend that disbelief, I think it works fairly well.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. You know, the final day where he's kind of given up trying and he is, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it is still that same day for her, even though it's been 8 or 9 years for him. So yeah, for her to know this guy, I guess she didn't know him that well. Like at the very beginning, I guess she's a new producer for him.
But all she's seen of him is like him as a jerk.
Right, right. Though part of what he's seen displayed to her being a jerk is on that Groundhog Day, right? I mean, he does the weather, and then they travel the next day to Punxsutawney, or however you say it. And so she has like half a day with him, and in the first couple of go-arounds, he is a jerk in Punxsutawney, but by the end, he's nice in Punxsutawney. He's bringing Chris Elliott coffee and asking him about, if he has kids, and he's carrying the camera for him. So I think we got to realize that her experience with him, a lot of what's colored in the beginning actually gets rewritten later on.
Yes. But still, to fall in love with somebody in one day is a bit of a stretch for me. Even if you see this person as like super Mr. Popular and super talented guy, I mean, she goes from not barely knowing him to spending all her money on the Bachelor auction. It just seemed like, I mean, yeah, if she had been watching the movie, then yeah, seen all the things that he did, saving the people's lives, trying to save the old homeless guy, saving the kid, all that stuff. What she did get was all the people coming up to him and, thanking him and whatever, and being big fans, and him being very magnanimous about it. Like, oh yeah, they've been hitting on me all night. I don't know what that's about. I mean, those are funny lines. He's very nonchalant about all these wonderful things he's doing for everybody. He's not trying to take any kind of like crazy credit or something, which as an audience we can appreciate, especially since he's been there for years and years and years of living this one day. Of course he's going to be able to get it right at some point eventually. But yeah, but I don't want to focus too much on it. I mean, the love story didn't work for me too much, and I think that's probably the movie's weakest point. I think the movie's strongest point is the evolution of the main character. And if you're telling a story, having a strong arc for a main character, molto bene, good job. You did a great job, movie, and anything extra is kind of gravy. I don't think that the movie, even if he hadn't gotten together with the love interest, it's still a complete movie. I mean, they throw that in there for the feels probably, and that was one of his goals. But I think it's even maybe even a stronger movie if he doesn't get the girl and still realizes, hey, I've become a complete person, and I like me now, and I like these people, and they're worth loving, and that kind of thing.
Right, get a little love in your heart. Like it's Scrooged all over again.
Yeah, it's Scrooged. It's Scrooged, and the love story in Scrooged was the weak part of that movie too. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the love story in this one is kind of the MacGuffin to keep things moving, to give him a goal that he's working towards, and he does set about with this infinite amount of time to try to achieve that goal, and in the process he becomes a bit of a Renaissance man. And one of the scenes was he's in this old folks home with these people watching Jeopardy, and he's like reciting all the answers, some of them even before Trebek says the question. And that reminded me of being at your place with your old man, and he would basically do that same thing when we would watch Jeopardy with him.
Well, the guy knows a few things. It's true. Where the household that I grew up in is very much a trivia-level household. A lot of useless knowledge bouncing around in the old buckets. Yeah, I can imagine only being able to watch one episode. The one episode, because this is, this is 1993. There's no DVR, there's no Netflix, there's no nothing. You can only watch what was on the TV. You would quickly, I think, find other things to do, like learn the piano or learn foreign languages or learn everything about everybody in town, because these are the only people you can talk to, the only things you can do. So, yeah, I mean, but it's still the fact that he chose to, he took the time to save people. That does show, the content of his character, because he didn't have to. Because these people, they're going to be alive again the next day, right? And what's the point of saving some kid if he's just going to be alive the next day anyway? But it showed the content of his character. So yeah, good job, movie.
Yeah, good job, movie. And I just want to throw a couple more scenes in there that I really enjoyed. And I know we're not really following our categories right now, but this is kind of a fun conversation, and we got a little bit of time. We're about 40 minutes in. Is when he's in the diner and he's realized that he can eat whatever he wants. It doesn't matter anymore. So he's got this banquet in front of him, and she says things like to him, "Do you think someone of an advancing age like yourself should be eating like this and not worrying about love handles and cholesterol?" And he's like smoking and whatever, and he just doesn't care anymore. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh yeah. This movie played with what would happen if a character really did have to live out every day, because everything he eats that day, just goes right back as if you didn't. So yeah, you would probably pig out a good portion of the time, I would think. Why not? You got to get some pleasure in somehow.
Yeah. Now, having to repeat this so many times. Now, it is one day, and it's one small town, and he is trapped, right? Because he has tried to escape or not escape. He's tried various things. Eventually, you'd run out of everything, right? You'll have done everything, eaten every type of food available, talked to every person available. And I don't know if it'd be 8 years of repetition, but if it was like 1,000 years of repetition, I mean, yeah, you'd get pretty tired of it,
Yeah, is this an argument against immortality, or I don't know. I think, yeah, you would definitely get super tired of it, especially if you're trapped in one little spot. Although the fact that he was able to milk so much out of one little area, I mean, what could a human being accomplish if they did live for, a really super long time? Would we be all super achievers? Would it, I tend to think that our decisions matter more, the less time you have, of course. Each decision is most precious. And I don't really have a point.
Well, I think this goes back to maybe something we've talked about, not on the show, but offline, and that is, we're getting a little older ourselves, and so we're starting to feel that pressure to accomplish something. And
oh yeah.
So I think that, maybe plays into some of your thinking here.
For sure. Right, yeah. I mean, I know we were just talking about this earlier before the show, was that this movie really showed somebody who was doing the same thing over and over again until he got it right. I mean, that is essentially the plot of the movie. Somebody who does something over and over and over again. And what is the definition of insanity, whatever, right? Doing the same thing over and over and again the same way, expecting a different result. So he really actually does do all kinds of different things until he finally achieves it. So, and I lost my point. Can you jump in here?
Yeah, well, I mean, he essentially becomes an expert level on everything that's happening there and on like little vanity projects. And, he started out being very vain, and there was a callback to Scrooged in that where I think this is at the scene where he has the plethora of food in front of him. But Andie MacDowell says, you're so vain, and he says something along the lines of, I don't even have a mirror. I haven't looked in a mirror in months. And, of course, in Scrooge, during the board meeting, he pulls out a drawer to look at himself in a mirror. So I thought that was pretty funny. And I think he did that intentionally or threw in this line to call back to that.
So you're making an argument for a Murrayverse, that these movies are all connected?
I think Bill Murray is the same character. He's just Bill Murray, man.
He is. I know. You can't really point to a Bill Murray movie where he's, like, radically different.
Lost in Translation. That one. he's very subdued.
He's subdued, but I wouldn't say he's super different.
Definitely not a character actor. I mean, he is a character. He is. You know what you're going to get when you have Bill Murray.
Yes. And Bill Murray, I think, is the famous. He's the famous guy where you can't actually get a hold of him. You have to leave a voicemail if you want him to do a movie, and then he'll check it and get back to you if he's interested. Like he doesn't have an agent or anything like that. He's certainly a one-of-a-kind kind of guy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know much about that. I just know that I enjoy his stuff, and I know one of our buddies really likes him as well. So, yeah, Bill Murray, good stuff. So, Groundhog Day. Let's get into our overall rating and review. So, final summary, and what number are you going to give this one?
All right. So this movie checked almost all the right boxes. Still funny, which is amazing after all this time. But I mean, I can't watch a Bill Murray movie without laughing at some point if he's allowed to be himself. It wasn't quite perfect for me, but that's perfectly fine. So I would give this movie 8.2. 8.2 on the Robert scale.
8.2 on the Robert scale. Well, I think I'm going to agree with you. It does hold up very strongly. Bill Murray's going to be the same character, but he also is so varied. Like, he has a lot of range. He can play that sardonic jerk, but he can also be that sweet puppy and throw in all the sarcastic and funny lines and get away with them. And so it's nice to see him playing in that sandbox where he can just kind of do whatever and do the ad-lib stuff, and it just makes me want to watch more of his stuff. So for that, I'm going to go with a 9.0. Andie MacDowell, she's fun and whatever, but she gets totally overshadowed by Bill Murray. And so yeah, 9.0 for me on this episode of Last Nighters. So
now this movie reminded me of a recent series of news articles. Apparently, millennials, social justice millennials, are going back and watching older movies and being completely offended. I think this is a movie that would definitely not quite pass the PC police, like many of the movies in the 80s. Like many. And even though this is a 90s movie, it still kind of feels like an 80s movie. But this is one of those movies where the characters act like, people do, unapologetically. And, wouldn't quite live up, or wouldn't quite exist. If they were trying to make this movie today, I think there would be some complaints about certain scenes and certain attitudes the characters took and that sort of thing. It's from a different era, and it's fun to see these people get upset about these normal movies. But anyway.
All right, well, that's a good point. But that's all the time we have for The Last Nighters, so thank you guys for joining us. You can find this episode at lastnighters.com/5. And so I say good night from last night.